Good morning here from Seattle. It's a sunny day and I want to enjoy this moment, drink my coffee and talk about some topics that are quite interesting. Lately I'm seeing a lot of these videos about why people are leaving the USA, why they prefer living abroad, makes more financial sense. They're even revoking their citizenships to be able to not pay taxes because there's a law in America that makes you pay even if you live abroad. And so they make these cases why it's best to leave this country. Now, I'm a European and I have lived in the USA for 20 years, and I think I have quite a good overview to be able to tell you the opposite, why I like living in the USA and why I have stayed here so long and why I don't plan to leave and why I will never revoke my American citizenship. So here we go. Number one reason is the economy, and everybody knows this, but it really is worth saying that the USA has the best economy the world has ever seen. It may not be as good as it has been in other times, but it's still the best. There is no comparison almost when it comes to how good it is. So when you are here, you have so much more opportunity as a result of that. So it still remains the country, as it has been for 200 years, where you can come with nothing like I did, and within one lifetime you will be quite well off, live a comfortable and even wealthy life just in one generation. But so many people here in the USA within 2 generations, 3 generations have become even billionaires, and that is not possible in any other country. Most other countries have very little upward mobility when it comes to the economy. So if you're born poor, generally you stay poor, and if you are upper class, you inherit a lot, and it's a protected turf. And that's very true in Europe, which has a long history of feudalism and so on. And also where I'm from, we had communism in Bulgaria, and there was no upward mobility whatsoever. Everybody was forced to live in pretty much projects, and that's how it was. And when there's an economic crisis here, for example, like 2008, it was hard for a lot of people, no denying that. However, I was thinking, really, this is a crisis in America? Because everyone was so much more wealthy than what we went through in the 90s, where I'm from, where economic crisis meant you cannot pay your light bill and you cannot afford to eat. That's a very different magnitude of crisis than what you get in the USA generally. And you could argue right now we're in a crisis, and yet still we are living so well compared to everyone else and compared to history. So the economy still remains the best in the world. All the best companies are here, almost in the world. Other companies, for example, you look at Korea, huge success story of development and capitalism, and they have just a few companies. You know, they have Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and a few more that you can list. In America, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of prestigious companies. Just in the city I live in here in Seattle, we have Amazon, we have Microsoft, we have Boeing, we have Starbucks, we have Costco, we have so many. Just listing them would take me all day. And new companies are born here constantly because America is the place that has the most venture capital by far. And that is private capital, which is looking for investment constantly. If you look at the statistics, in Europe, almost all the funding comes from banking institutions. So you don't have that option almost there. You don't have the VC game. Well, here, that's pretty much the predominant game when it comes to spawning new businesses and to looking for opportunities. So reason number one, the USA still has an unbeatable economy. I was able to come here with nothing. I had something like $800 to spend when I arrived, and by now I live quite well. I can do almost anything I want, and that was not at all possible where I'm from. And people that stayed in Europe don't have that type of freedom and that type of success. Reason number two, I really like the USA, is the geography, and that is a broad topic, so I'm going to break it down quite a bit, but a lot comes with that. So the USA being more recently colonized and settled heavily, unlike Europe or Asia, has a lot more land which is still being developed, and this also is what enables the economics. So also in the USA there's 2 oceans, there's seas around the coast as well, and there are big rivers which are very easy to navigate by boats. And so when you put all that together, there is no other country on the planet which is blessed with such geography, and that really is good when it comes to economic development and when it comes to ensuring their people here live good lives. Now, you can think of it in a few ways, but the first one is living space. So in the USA, if you look at the statistics, living space is by far the most per capita. People live, compared to Asia, it's like no contest, maybe 3 to 4 times more space. Compared to Europe, still quite a lot more. Most Europeans, in fact, live in condos, or what they call apartments or flats over there, and they're used to it. They do that for a lifetime. They think that's life. Americans actually avoid that. Here everyone wants a house, and very few choose to live in a condo. Almost nobody lives in a condo for their whole life. In general, in the USA, we have so much more living space than other countries, and that is a huge factor of the quality of life. And it has to do with family formation, being able to have children. It has to do with mental health, truly, and how happy you are. All that is very important. But it doesn't just end there, because the fact that America simply has a better geography and more land and less people also means that we have better public spaces, especially natural ones. So in most American cities, there are enormous parks. You can walk for hours through pristine nature right in the city. Case in point, Seattle is one of the very best for that. It has something like 450 parks, and you can just go and go forever. And you have lakes, you have mountains right in the city, you have old growth forest and things like that right in the city. I've been to places which are nice cities like Frankfurt and others, Munich and London, Berlin, Paris. Their parks are not even a fraction of what we have. It may be a tenth, maybe less. And so when you live like that, you live in a flat and you don't have natural setting near you, you end up really, it warps your mind. You are not as calm, you're not as happy. And I wouldn't trade that. I wouldn't want to go in a concrete jungle for 100% of my existence, where I literally live in a box. And that's it. And there are even people living on top of me and people under me. And then if I want to get away from it all, there's nowhere to go, where I just enjoy peace and quiet and serenity and beauty. And that is something very strong in the USA. You have that option almost at hand, always. In some cities, on foot, you can get to it so easily, like here in Seattle. In other places, you have to drive. That's really the majority. But you have that option. Now, the other thing about the geography is that not only the cities have so much natural setting and such preserves, the country itself has enormous land which is preserved and is just pristine, untouched, beautiful nature which you cannot find almost anywhere in the world. Most of it is in national parks that everybody knows about, but the truth is, beyond national parks, there are also national forests, there are state parks, there are county parks, there's wilderness, there's all kinds of stuff that really makes this place the best of all for a nature lover, which I am. And you just cannot compete. And beyond just the existence of it, there's also the diversity of it, because no other country is as diverse when it comes to nature. And you have everything. You have oceans, beaches, you have mountains, forests, you have deserts, you have the tropics, you have the Arctic, you have everything. You have the Great Plains. It just doesn't end when it comes to variety, as well as the biodiversity. It's one of the top in the world, so you can see a lot of wildlife here. It's still preserved. I can go into my city, I see seals, sometimes even orca whales, sometimes gray whales, often seals, otters, bald eagles, every day in my neighborhood. You don't have that in Europe, in almost in any other country, especially not in Asia. And so that's to me also very, very important. Now, the next thing I really like about the USA is that we have the most rights of anybody by far, especially when it comes to big countries. We saw that very well illustrated with the recent calamity in the world, where most countries lost their rights almost completely. Currently in China, over 350 million people are basically in house arrest. They can't even buy food. And that's more than the entire population of the USA. In Europe, where I'm from, the rules were so tight. There were curfews, they have to have passes, things like that. There were forced injections. There were all kinds of crazy things that would never happen in the USA, simply because the US Constitution protects against it, and the culture is very averse to any sort of tyrannical interventions in your life. Even though this was unprecedented, even though here in America there was intrusion on that, it was so much less. Here in Seattle, where I live, there was about 2 months of partial lockdown, which meant just a few things were closed, but most things actually stayed open. You were never not allowed to leave your house or do anything you want, truly, other than going to certain businesses that got shut down. That only lasted for 2 months. In many places it lasted for a year or two, and it was a nightmare. So in the US, in the end of the day, we actually had very little missing when it came to our freedom, even during one of the most difficult periods of all for this type of thing. And now, beyond that, in regular times, America still has the most rights. We have the right to free speech. In Europe, where I'm from, you can get arrested or fined for stating your opinion in a private conversation. That to me sounds insane after living for 20 years in the USA, that somebody would come and persecute me because of something I've said to a friend of mine or so. I have heard about my grandfather during the old days that he would have told a joke to 3 friends of his that he knew all the time, his whole life, and then he was arrested for that joke. So then you have to spend a night in jail for a joke you made with your best friends because one of them turned out to be an informer, and there's laws against speaking even to your friends about certain things. In Western Europe, that is the case right now too. Many people are getting fined, going to jail over simple comments they have made. That is so disturbing, and as somebody who lives in the USA, it's unthinkable to me. And so I would never trade that in particular. Then you have the right to defend yourself in the USA, which also does not exist almost anywhere in the world, but it especially doesn't exist in Europe. And you will be arrested in many cases for defending yourself, which is also unthinkable to me. You may be a victim of something, and yet you become the criminal because you try to protect yourself. In the USA, the rights are by far the most, and these are ones on the surface, but it goes beyond everything. So even when the government tries to do things that may not sit too well with the public, there's immediately a lawsuit. There may be a party in power. We have seen this a lot lately. They try to do something, and there's the opposition filing a lawsuit. And when they file the lawsuit, courts shut down, and the party in power cannot force what it wanted to do. The framework of the law is such that it actually highly limits those in power in what they can do. And especially with what we saw in the last 2 years, and even before that, there was a lot of opposition to what was being done. And in the end of the day, not much was able to be forced upon the people of the USA. And that is yet another big reason I will never give up my US citizenship, because I don't want to be stuck in a place where that is not the case and I become a victim of tyranny that doesn't even concern me. I can just be caught off guard and my life ruined for nothing that I have done, you see. So that is really important. The next thing which is really important, and it's also political, are wars. And yes, the USA takes part in many wars. However, they don't take part on American soil. While being from Europe, historically, there's almost always a war in Europe, a big one. And where I'm from, Bulgaria, there was the war about 100-something years ago against the Turkish Empire. And we were able to liberate ourselves, so that's one war. Right after that, 2 wars happened in which the people that fought against the Turks alongside Bulgaria then turned on each other and mostly just ganged up on Bulgaria and ended up taking more territory from us. So that's 3 wars very quickly right there. Then World War I happened. Huge war, everyone knows about it. Then another 20, 30 years later, World War II happened. So you have 5 wars, some of them extremely big, affecting the same place over and over again. And that is not an anomaly, that is the norm in Europe. And living in a place like that, you just never know. Right now, again, happening in Eastern Europe, where I'm from. I am luckily not from Ukraine, so my family is not affected by this, but it's nearby. Water mines are washing out on the sea. Stuff like that is happening, and so in the USA you don't have to worry about those things. The country mostly goes out intervening, but it is almost never attacked on its soil. Of course, there was Pearl Harbor, but that was a small island, 1,000-something more miles away from the mainland. So that is not at all like your country getting invaded and half of it becoming a war zone. And that happens all the time in many parts of the world. Here in the USA, we're quite safe from such things altogether. And there's also the might. The USA is so powerful that no one in their right mind would attack it in its mainland. Historically, also Japan said famously that they would not want to land in the USA because everyone has guns, and that would mean there's a gun behind every blade of grass, and there was simply no way for Japan to invade here. And that's probably still the case. So you're safer here. You have to worry about much less. And it's important, especially compared to Europe. Another thing I already mentioned briefly in context of geography, but it goes beyond much more than that, that makes me really like the USA, is the diversity, the variety. There's just so much here that isn't elsewhere, like in homogeneous places like Asia or Europe. And this is unparalleled in the USA. Obviously, it has to do with who you meet in society, so people here are from everywhere. Some people may not like that, but I do as an immigrant. I'm married to a Korean woman. I like the fact that when I leave my house on any given day, I'm exposed to all kinds of cultures. I'm enriched by them. I can eat the food they make, I can listen to the music they make, and so on. I can talk to them about how they feel about everything. Altogether, in addition to the USA being so diverse in geography, you can experience just about everything. On that level, you can also do so culturally by simply hopping around even your own city, if it's a metropolis like Seattle, but you can go change region. For example, if I go to Miami, I will be surrounded by 85% Latinos. If I went to New York, they have all kinds of groups in there that are from everywhere as well. They have all these heritages like Irish, Italian, Jewish, all kinds. You can, again, eat their food, you can see their art, their symbolism, hear their stories. In places like Asia or Europe, yes, there's diversity, but it's other Europeans, it's a similar culture. It's not like here you'll be like, oh, today I want Tibetan, tomorrow I want to go Indonesian restaurant and culture, I want to go to a Balinese spa, I want to go to listen to Ukrainian folk dance. I can do that on the same day in Seattle, anytime I want. And so it is unparalleled when it comes to that. So you have with that also more diversity of thought, which is also enabled by the free speech, and you feel more emancipated, more liberated, especially when you have the vast open spaces and you're more relaxed, and altogether it's becoming this full package that you cannot find anywhere else on the planet. Now, I mentioned these big topics. There are many smaller topics within them or outside of them, but this is how things are and how they have been. This is why the USA has been a magnet for immigration more than any country ever in the history of humanity. Why millions and millions of people have come here from Europe, from Asia, from everywhere, from Latin America, and they continue coming today because this place is better to make a living and be free and safe and so on. I explained why the USA is so desirable and why millions of people have been moving here for all these reasons I outlined. But it actually is going to become even more so because of major developments in the world today. And I'll explain what we have to look forward to now. If you look back, I made a video about the time of plenty being over, and it comes down to deglobalization. Now, the context here is that after the World War II, there was the Cold War, and communism was an ideology on the rise, and the USA was fighting against it because its rival, the Soviet Union, was the one pushing it. And what the USA did in response to that is it used its economy and its economic model, which is capitalism, which is really the economic system of liberalism. And what it did was go around the world and try to create an enormous network, global network of such a capitalist economy. And it was known as globalization. This globalization rose the most people out of poverty ever by an unmatched magnitude. It's just not even comparable to anything else that has ever happened in the world. A lot of it happened in Asia, but it happened everywhere in the world. It happened in Europe first, actually, after the war. It happened in Japan as well. And so it was really the USA lending its economic prowess and might to be able to lift others up, so that way they oppose communism, which had a very bad economic model and a very tyrannical political system. So the USA wanted to show everyone that its way is better, and that worked very well. And then we live in that ever since we were born in the era of globalization. But the USA was actually quite well off and in a very good place before globalization. So keep that in mind, because it's very important for the point I'm going to make. Now, based on many things, globalization is ending, and you can find evidence for that everywhere, and I've made another video about that, so you can look back and I can link about it. The issue is that all the people and all the countries which were lifted out of poverty and were made better off by globalization with the help of the USA are now risking reverting back to those conditions before, because globalization and the USA provided all the means for them to improve their lives over the last 70 or so years. And this is grim. It's very grim, because you are talking about, in many cases, an inability to sustain modern life. And with deglobalization will then come deindustrialization, and with that people will not have access to things like electricity, cars, fuel, fertilizer, food supply, clean water. And yet, based on the last decades, their populations have increased a lot, their demands have increased a lot, so it's like falling sharply down off a cliff. And that's what much of the world is risking. But again, because the USA was already developed and wealthy and had an economy of scale and had a first world lifestyle before it created globalization, it is okay without globalization. It has everything it needs to sustain this way of life indefinitely. However, many other parts of the world do not. You're already seeing it in Europe with the conflicts there, and also the lockdowns that caused great disruptions, inflation and the prices spiking. All that translates into an inability to maintain the way of life. And so Europe was not exactly first world. Famously, for most of its history, it's poor for the most part it's poor, with the exception of entrenched elites and aristocracy, and that's why there's an issue with upward mobility. And this is what we're looking at again, because there's no rising tide anymore. You know how they say the rising tide lifts all boats? Well, the tide is now diminishing very quickly, and so lots of boats are going to get stuck on the shore with now no way of moving anywhere. And you're looking at then the end of this world in which we have been used to everything improving. You always get richer, new things come out, new gadgets, and life gets easier and better every year or over time, every decade. That's going to end almost everywhere. But in North America, we actually have what we need. America has all the capital, it has the workforce, it has the know-how, the best education. It has a lot of resources, it has a lot of land, it has a lot of water, it has a lot of everything, soil, sun. Its neighbors are also very important. Canada has a lot of resources, it's sparsely populated, and it's basically an extraction economy which sells raw materials to the US. All their population really live just on the border, and so they are very beneficial to the US without being a threat to the US because of their much smaller size and the military discrepancy. So the USA benefits greatly from having such a neighbor on the north. And in an era of globalization, it actually very much so is already evident how raw materials are a big factor. Famously right now, Russia has 30% of them in the world, and yet is getting sanctioned, which means many will not be able to get them. But the USA, together with Canada, it has a lot to keep doing what it's doing. It will also use a lot of the power it has to obtain more on its own hemisphere within Latin America. It will cut deals and invest capital and so on, where it will be able to secure what it needs to sustain its way of living. In addition with that, America's southern border is also very important. Mexico, because Mexico is one of the very few countries in the world which have favorable demographics. They have a young and large workforce, and they still can perform a lot of the labor which globalization had exported to Asia. But now it can come really close to America. America can invest in its neighbor instead of far away rivals across the ocean. And in this manner, that shortage too will not manifest so badly, while countries perhaps like Europe, which are far away from any kind of cheap labor, they're already in demographic decline, and they cannot substitute, especially now with the baby boomer generation. There's no substitute for the labor in Europe, which is going to come out of the workforce, and with that is also going to come out a lot of capital, and there's no replacement for it, which alone means a diminishing standard of living worse every year instead of living better, as we have all gotten used to. So between those two neighbors and between its own population and resources, the USA does not really risk a sharp downturn in its standard of living. And whenever there's such a sharp downturn, you're seeing right now, for example, in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, they ran out of many things. Fuel, food is running out. Immediately what happens is riots. There are political turmoil, and they have started torching government buildings, houses of politicians. The government has resigned, people are dying, and that happens every time there's a sharp economic downturn and the standard of living cannot be sustained. So that is what the rest of the world having to face now because of deglobalization, and the whole system is coming undone. And the USA doesn't have this problem. So what you're actually going to see, unlike what was preached for so long it was said everybody's the same now. Everybody's going to be America. Everywhere it's wealthier, everywhere is better life, everywhere is freer. That's going to reverse sharply. It already is, and it has. And you can see it in China, where everyone's under lockdown to insane levels. You're seeing it everywhere. And so, again, because of that, because of all these reasons, I would have to be a complete fool to give up my American citizenship so I save on taxes. Because this place is like a fortress where you can still get a very good way of life for yourself and your family. Now, with all this said, yes, there are many problems here. Yes, there are many things I miss from Europe. And yes, there's a lot to criticize for sure. So if you like this video, subscribe, and I'll make another one about all the things I don't like as a European living 20 years in the USA. Believe me, I have strong opinions on that as well, and I will share them. See you next time.